Oh, this? Look at this.
Whoa.
It's not a hot take at this point that the MCU's reputation after Endgame has taken a bit of a hit. People are finally feeling that superhero fatigue we've been hearing about for years on end. Sure, they've had a few successes here and there, but consensus on phases 4 and 5 are that they are mid. It's very easy to look back at all this and say, well, they should have just done X, Y, and Z. But it's a lot harder to take a step back and say, okay, this is what we have. How do we correct course? I'm not a Kevin Feige hater. I think he's responsible for giving us some of the best of the MCU, but I'm also not gonna worship the ground he walks on when he makes mistakes. I'm not looking to point blame here. There's a lot of people involved, and they aren't all him. Long story short, I wanted to explore what the MCU should have done after Endgame, but I don't want this to devolve into wishful thinking. So I'm setting a few ground rules for myself. Number 1, I can't make up new projects. I can change or delete existing projects, but I can't just make something out of thin air, like saying that they should have just done X-Men or Fantastic Four right after Endgame. Number 2, the projects have to have come out in the same order as they did in real life. The idea here is that I am Kevin Feige. In his shoes, what would I do? So I'm restricted to the same things as him when the projects were greenlit and put into development. Number 3, I have to keep any major additions that the movie's made. For example, I couldn't take Namor out of Black Panther 2, not that I would, but I have to keep major characters in the story. Smaller characters are fair game, and I can evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. Number 4, I can't just throw characters in wherever I want them. I have to explain why it would make sense to put that specific character in that specific movie if they're not already in it. And that's more or less the gist of it. From my armchair here, I'm going to go through the post-Endgame MCU and make some changes and try to make it better. Starting with our first year of 2020 run, right out of COVID, where our first project was Wandavision! Oh, Wandavision. It was so good until it wasn't. I think this is a very good project to start with because I don't actually have to change that much. I think the bones of the show are really fun. The mystery, the different TV shows and time periods, it manages to explore Wanda's grief pretty well. But there's one major thing about this show that kills the pacing. All of the sword stuff. This 4th episode here takes all the fun mystery out of the show and replaces it with a really generic, boring subplot of these sword agents explaining the whole show to the audience. This really bothers me. I hate when shows are really hand-holdy and tell you exactly what happened. And this is the first major change I'm gonna make. We never see anything that happens outside of the Hex until the last episode. You might be saying to yourself, but if you do that, we won't have enough context as to why Monica gets her powers. And you're totally right there. And that's because Monica is not going to get her powers here. She'll be in the show the whole time as one of the people held captive by Wanda, but we won't even know who she is until the very end. This way, we can keep the mystery going the whole time, still planting little seeds here and there, that there are people working to get inside the Hex, without the show explaining it to us like we're babies. Don't worry, Monica will still get her powers in another project, but just not here. Next up, we're gonna commit a lot harder to the fact that Wanda is the villain here. The original show is weirdly forgiving of her actions. Monica is like, oh my god, bestie, I'm so sorry they don't understand what you're going through. Like, huh? She kidnapped a whole town! By giving her this big CGI fight with Agatha and this moment where she earns her costume, we're making our audience think that she's in the right here. So here's what we're changing. Agatha is still in the show. Remember, she's too major of a character for me to take out. But she's not the main villain. The main villain here is Wanda, who has personally tricked Agatha into helping her make the Hex. This way, we still explore the lore around the Scarlet Witch, but we're committing to the fact that Wanda is still the villain. The transition from WandaVision to Multiverse of Madness is very sloppy, because she goes from being an empathetic hero who did a bad thing to a psychotic mass murderer off-screen. Committing to Wanda being the villain will make this transition a lot more seamless. And instead of a CGI punch-up between Wanda and Agatha, we can get a more emotional conflict with Wanda and Vision, where he convinces her to remove the Hex and just let him die. Alright, that's another thing I'm gonna change from the events of the show. Vision here stays dead. Well, actually, the original Vision is... Shut up! No, Vision is dead. No white Vision, no nothing. We'll reveal that Wanda has been puppeteering his corpse around, but nobody makes a new Vision. And at the end, he's still dead. It thematically makes no sense to have a whole show exploring the loss of her love, only for him to be resurrected at the end anyway. So Vision stays dead, Wanda is the villain, and there's no more sword scenes throughout the whole show. It'll be more of a slow burn as Vision slowly puts the pieces together. We would still get all the great parts of the show, but without the distracting, bland MCU segments. The last few episodes of WandaVision are really thematically confused, and I think all of that could be tightened up by keeping the focus on the two title characters. And you might be thinking, what about
Ralph Boner?
Well, I'm actually not gonna change that. At least not entirely. This still isn't going to be Quicksilver from the X-Men films, or at least, we're not gonna know who it is. Ever. The identity of MCU Evan Peters will remain a mystery forever. I just don't think it makes any sense to cram multiverse stuff into this story. We're keeping this simple. Wanda is a broken person starting her descent. Our focus should be on her. I think just a few small changes would make the show way more enjoyable. Part of the problem with the Phase 4 and 5 projects has been that I don't really feel like revisiting them because they just feel like wasted potential. A lot of them, and mostly the shows, fall apart in the end because they just don't know how to commit to their premise. Oh, that reminds me of another show. I actually liked the show. I thought it was fun. I don't know. I like Sam Wilson a lot, and seeing him be Cap was satisfying and fun. But there are some major problems with this show. Even I, as someone who liked it, can see that. Bucky, who is our co-lead, has almost nothing to do the entire time. They bring in Sharon and Zemo and do literally nothing with them. Especially Sharon, who gets a twist reveal that she's the power broker. Oh my god, who could have seen it coming? And then we have the US agent and his super rushed redemption arc that's sloppy at best. Plus, the villain in this show sucks ass. They beat us over the head with the fact that she's empathetic to the point where it's getting really annoying. It has a very common problem of having a villain who's pretty much in the right, but we have to have her blow up hospitals so that she's still the villain. It plays it way too safe with its messaging. It wants to make a stand on something, but just rolls it back to stay safe and not rock the boat too much.
You've got to do better, Senator.
A much cooler structure for the show would be for the government to pit Sam and Bucky against this group of radicals, but in the end Sam realizes they're actually the good ones and the government are the ones who need taking down. That way he could adopt this Captain America identity in the process and make a final grand stand against the US government as Captain America. That would be fucking raw. I know those are some big changes, and maybe they're not even worth talking about, because I'm gonna delete this project entirely. I know, but if you refer back to the rules, I am allowed to delete existing projects if I can make a case for it and still abide by the rest of my rules. So here it is. Nothing in the show actually needs to be seen. The show exists just to make Sam into Captain America. But if you skip the show and went straight from Endgame to Captain America 4 as the next project, it still makes total sense. You can kind of just assume he took up the mantle in the middle. You could skip Falcon and the Winter Soldier entirely and not miss anything. Now, if you recall, one of my rules is that I have to keep any major additions made by the shows or movies. But the only one that I think qualifies is US Agent. Everyone else is either a returning character or too minor for anyone to really miss them. So, as a solution to the US Agent problem, he's just going to get introduced for the first time in Captain America 4, so no big loss when we scrap the whole show. I'm deleting it entirely because I think it did more harm than good. Having less projects is going to make people not as fatigued by Marvel. Quality over quantity is the philosophy here at Armchair Feige, and if a show or movie just doesn't have enough merit, getting rid of it and allocating its resources elsewhere is the smartest move. So, Falcon and the Winter Soldier was never released, and the next project after it was... This one's fine. Next. Alright, I'll expand on it. I like Loki. I think it's a good, fun show, and it's exactly what it should be. It's got its own cast, supporting characters, a solid storyline. Visually, it looks great. there's actually a lot of effort here from the ground up. I was not hyped for the show at all, because after years of not killing off Loki, I was excited that Infinity War was finally the end. I was worried this show would undo any of that sacrifice, but it really just recontextualizes the character. And it's interesting in its own right. It's made better by the fact that season 2 is out and it's also good, but I'm saying this show is its own thing, and it is the minimum level of good that these projects should be. So I'm literally not changing anything here, except maybe the actor playing Kang. I will say that down the line, I'll touch on my thoughts on Kang and what they were going to do, but what they're going to boil down to is that he should just be the villain for the Loki show and nothing else. So with that said, this show and all the lore that is established gets to stay intact. Good job on this one, everyone. Jesus, okay, there's a lot of stuff I'm gonna have to change here. To start off, I'm definitely not going to get rid of this project. It is one of 2 movies at this point to be led by a woman. That would be pretty stupid of me. But also, I think the character of Black Widow is too important to the MCU's history at this point to neglect her a project. The character is popular enough where a solo movie based around her makes total sense and would make a lot of money, as long as the movie is, good and not released in this weird half Disney Plus, half theatrical thing they tried. So for starters, the biggest problem this movie has is its weird setting in the timeline. Being set after Civil War limits the story because we already know Natasha both up to and after that point in time. So no character development she has is ever going to be that noticeable. Also, who really gives a shit about Civil War at this point? The movie we got already so desperately wants to be a prequel. The whole plot revolves around Natasha's past, so let's just go all the way and do her S.H.I.E.L.D. origin story. My pitch for this movie is a Black Widow and Hawkeye buddy cop deal. One of the biggest annoyances I had with this movie when it came out was that it kept telling and not showing. Natasha talks constantly about her adventures with Clint, but we don't get to see any of them. Yeah, it might be a bit of pandering to show us what happened in Budapest, but this is Marvel we're talking about. It's not exactly like they've shown restraint in the past. So my version of the movie opens up with Natasha going about her typical Black Widow duties, spying, assassinating, and so forth. She'll be joined by her sister Yelena, so we can still introduce her in the film, but her role would be a bit different. In this movie, on a typical run-of-the-mill assignment as Black Widow, Natasha is ordered to kill an American diplomat. But this time she's intercepted by Clint Barton. And we're gonna say he's in an actual good version of his costume, just for fun. Clint will have been sent there on a mission for S.H.I.E.L.D. to intercept and kill the infamous Black Widow before she starts an international war. Throughout the film, Clint would be ignoring his orders from S.H.I.E.L.D. and attempting to recruit Natasha instead of kill her, while Natasha and Yelena attempt to carry out their mission despite Clint's constant attempts to thwart it. This would eventually lead to an action sequence where the Widows and Clint would have to work together in order to get out of a tight spot, during which time Clint and Natasha would have their first actual heart-to-heart where he finally starts getting through to her about what she could be doing instead. In the end, Natasha would obviously choose Clint over Yelena and attempt to start wiping the red out of her ledger by stopping Yelena from killing the diplomat and working with Clint to take down the Widow program. Yelena would function more like an antagonist in the end, but not one that's fully irredeemable. Which, by the way, would make it make way more sense why she hates Clint, because she feels like he stole Natasha from her. She would be a victim of indoctrination by the Russian government, but still trying to do the right thing. This movie would feel more like an espionage thriller all about redemption. We'd actually get to see the lows that Natasha sank to in her time as an assassin at the beginning of the movie, and at the end would see her starting her journey that we see her on in the later movies. Now you may be asking, what about Red Guardian and Taskmaster? I said earlier all major characters needed to be kept, and while I'm really tempted to break the rule, I think instead we would just have Red Guardian be the one who's in charge of the Widows, not some misguided father figure who makes bad jokes and doesn't have a role in the story.
You should have brought the Avengers Superjet.
You both have killed so many people.
You should only sacrifice yourself for something.
Instead, he would be a guy trying to do what he thinks is the best for his country, but going about it by manipulating and abusing these women. That way you keep a lot of the commentary that the movie has going for it already. He would basically be the actual villain of the movie instead. And as for Taskmaster, that character honestly needs to be reworked from the ground up. The MCU version is fucking awful. And no, morons, it's not because of the gender swap, it's just because they literally had nothing for her to do. So I'm gonna bend my rules just a little bit. and say that we'll do Taskmaster in another MCU project, but they don't fit here. The Black Widow movie we got is lame as hell, and the character deserves a lot better. We need to learn new things about Natasha and watch her grow. I think in her case, a full-on prequel is totally appropriate.
And ponder the question, what if?
Delete it. Next.
Yeah, somehow I'm calling it now.
Ugh, fine. Look, I fucking hate this show so much. I'm sorry, but I watched season 1 and man was it a fucking chore. What If Season 2 is the first MCU project that I've ever skipped. I don't like the animation style. Having the actors voice their characters was a bad idea.
Not quite. The beacon's location was corrupted in transit.
But most of all the scenarios are just boring. All of them are like the least interesting ones you could think of. They're all just, what if this character was this character? And then there's an incessant need to connect them all at the end, even though the whole point is to not have interconnectivity. I just think it's bad. It's dumb, it's not fun to watch. Honestly, there's probably a way to make a good show from the concept, but I don't want to spend any mental energy on it, so we're deleting it entirely. Goodbye.
Yeah, somehow I'm calling it now.
Alright, so this movie is a lot of fun. Easy, breezy, totally watchable, if not anything special. So the changes we're making here are, all things considered, pretty minor. The main thing we're gonna change is the third act. The movie has a lot of fun action and fight choreography until the very end where it gets muddy and turns into, well, this. We don't need a dragon fight. I'm sorry. It takes up a lot of time and you forget about a lot of the actual emotional stakes we'd set up between Shang-Chi and his father. Their final confrontation is good, but needs to be tightened up and set in a more interesting location than this. So in my version of the movie, Shang-Chi's central conflict is going to be that when the time comes, he doesn't think he'll have it in him to kill his father. Think of it similarly to what Aang goes through with the Fire Lord, but instead of having a problem with killing itself, Shang-Chi just doesn't want to give up on his dad. That is actually pretty much already in the movie, but it's just not reflected well in their final fight. His father ends up dying, but I always forget because it's immediately followed up by this insane CGI fest. So, Wenwu in this version is fully aware of what he's trying to unleash. In the real movie, he fully thinks his wife is behind the wall and not one of the monsters from Godzilla 2014. So when he finally opens it, he's just like, ah damn, I was wrong, and then gets eated. What we're gonna have instead is that Wenwu is totally aware that there's demons behind the wall, but he doesn't care because he's looking to strike up a deal, giving up Tao Lo for his wife. Shang will try to stop him from opening the wall in a very intimate one-on-one fight between the two of them. Eventually, Shang would break through to his father and prevent him from even opening it in the first place. We would never find out what's behind the wall. We never even get to see it. But due to the actions that he took to get here, Tao Lo is still unstable and going to be destroyed unless he solidifies it with the power of the 10 rings. Wenwu is forced to give up his immortality and his chance of reunion with his wife in order to save her people and his children. Then he'd revert to his real age, like Juliet in Wizards of Waverly Place, before dying in his son's arms, redeemed and at peace. I like this idea because it accomplishes the same principle as the actual movie, but with way less going on. Think of it as akin to Spider-Man 2's ending with Doc Ock. Nothing crazy happens there. Spider-Man and him talk for a bit, and then he just drowns. Also, I like that Shang wouldn't have the 10 rings after the movie. He'd just be a guy who's good at martial arts. I find that a lot more interesting in an ensemble situation than a guy with vaguely powered energy discs. Part of the fun of the movie was those early fight scenes, and I worry that the future MCU stuff won't do that with him because now he has these ultra powerful rings. But in our version, he wouldn't have the rings because they're destroyed. Yeah, not that much needs to change in this version of the movie. I think it's honestly fine as it is, but I could see a little bit of room for improvement. Oh, also Trevor Slattery needs to go. Sorry, he's not funny. He was funny for a minute, but then he really overstays his welcome. Like, why is he here in the final battle, man? What are you doing? So, if it'll make you feel better, he can still have his cameo, and then he's gotta go.
Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause.
Let me tell you, before this video, this was the only movie in the entire MCU that I had never watched a second time. Oh, this one too, I guess. And after rewatching it, I'm glad to report that the movie still sucks complete ass. Look, there are a lot of things about Eternals that I would like to change, but in order to paint the real picture, and also because I'm dying to make fun of it, I need to go into detail about what exactly went wrong with this movie. Now, when this movie was announced, I was pretty confident that it would be one of Marvel's better and more ambitious projects. The cosmic side of Marvel was having a bit of an emergence, and I think we all thought that a cosmic odyssey helmed by an Oscar-winning director would be pretty good. Plus, they had an all-star cast, heavy hitter after heavy hitter. I mean, Angelina Jolie, Selma Hayek, Barry Keoghan, come on. And my god, this movie is just so dull. When people defend this movie, I often hear them say that people just didn't like it because it was too different and they wanted the Marvel formula. And to the people who say that, I must ask you, are you on drugs? This is the most generic, formulaic, paint by numbers you can get for a Marvel movie. From constant bad jokes.
Uni, meaning one, mind meaning mind.
Oh no, we heard you the first time.
Terrible name.
Well, brainstorm. Brainstorm!
Whoa.
I'm Karun, Kingo's valet.
Oh, valet, like Alfred in Batman.
I made it from corn. I chew each kernel myself and ferment it in my spit.
To insanely long blocks of expository dialogue.
We're Eternals, from a planet called Olympia. We came here 7,000 years ago on the Domo, our starship, to protect humans from the deviants.
Every billion years, new Celestials must be born. I plant celestial seeds into host planets across the universe.
The planet Earth was chosen to host the celestial Tiamat. In order to grow, Tiamat needs vast amounts of energy from intelligent life.
The deviants prevented this by consuming humans until the Eternals eliminated them. The human population of this planet has reached the required amount. It is time for the emergence to begin.
Two annoying references to the wider universe, cliffhangers that will go nowhere, and horrible, horrible, ugly costumes. Now, it's not all terrible. I mean, there are a few frames that look pretty good. People love to cherry pick them from the movie and act like it looks like that the whole time, but it doesn't. Most of the time, it looks pretty dull. Among the lifeless cast of characters, there are a few that I don't hate. Druig, Makari, Thena, God, these names, and Phastos are all interesting enough to watch, but they're also the ones with like the least to do in the story. Instead, we're left with Cersei, who does not have a personality or character traits, Icarus, who has exactly one more character trait than Cersei because he's mean, Sprite, who never stood a chance of being likable, and Kingo, who, I cannot believe I'm saying this, sits out the final battle. He literally fucks off and sits out the whole thing. He's given so much screen time beforehand, mostly to make shitty jokes, only to have an arc that does not resolve. Kind of a big rule of screenwriting is that if a character doesn't have a reason to be in the story, they probably just shouldn't be in it at all. You can't just take any of the original 6 Avengers out of the plot without changing major parts of the story. Same goes for Guardians of the Galaxy. Everyone has a reason to be there, whether it's for the plot or thematically. Eternals opts for the Justice League approach, which is filling the screen with as many bodies as possible, even if they have no reason to be around. Many could be taken out entirely and not have anything change all that much. Kingo is the worst example of this, especially since it doesn't even make sense for his character to do this. Of all the characters to care if the Earth is blown up, Kingo should be one of the ones who doesn't want that to happen. He is the only one with a human companion. This guy, who's in the movie more than Makari, not even Cersei brings her pal into the adventure, which is another problem. I swear to God I will touch on it. Let's talk about the plot for a second. The entire conflict here is this. The Eternals are created by the Celestials to protect mankind from the Deviants. That way, humanity can grow its population enough to a point where the big egg inside the Earth will hatch and birth a new Celestial, which will then go on to create new planets. Okay, a couple of things here. Number one, there is no reason that anybody should be on the side that it's okay to let the Earth blow up. This is a completely manufactured conflict. No one in the real world would ever hold the value of a bunch of planets that don't exist yet over one that currently does. Those two things are not of equal value, no matter how you slice it. It's not even like if they don't let Earth die, the universe will die. It's a bunch of planets that don't exist yet. So why the fuck would anyone put that above the planet that they currently live and have friends on? And it's like they chose at random which Eternals would be on which side of the debate. Sprite switches sides on a dime in order to impress Icarus, and Kingo fucking leaves even though he's on the side that wants to blow the Earth up. But again, he's the only one who seems to like being on Earth. When I say that these motherfuckers are dry, I mean it. I know nothing about Cersei. I know nothing about Icarus. The ones I do know about are the ones that are pushed way to the back. The other plot problem here is that the existence of the Eternals and the Deviants doesn't make any sense. If the Eternals were created in order to make the population of the Earth large enough for the big egg to hatch, why did they not help with Thanos? We're told early in the movie that they didn't help because they're not supposed to interfere with human affairs unless it's the Deviants. Okay, whatever, but the reveal that the Celestials want the population to be big completely ruins this, because a guy killing half the population is actually a direct threat to the Celestials. So why does it make any sense for the Eternals to not interfere? I'm gonna start sobbing. What are we doing here, Marvel? So, how do we fix this? Well, even though I am tempted, and I mean very tempted, to just hit my big red delete the entire thing button, if we refer back to the rules, I have to keep any major additions that were made. And I guess these guys technically qualify as major additions. So, what do we do with them? I think we actually got our answer to that question in the last couple of months. We're going to make the Eternals an animated series. Remember earlier how I criticized how ugly the Eternals costumes are? Well, the reason for that is, look at the original Jack Kirby illustrations for the character. They're incredibly bright and vibrant. Now compare them to how they look in the MCU. I think if you really want to capture the vibe and essence of those original illustrations, there's no better format than animation. We recently got X-Men 97, and it just looks incredible. X-Men also has a huge ensemble cast, but none of them feel like they get lost in the larger project. With an animated series, we would get a better sense of who each of the Eternals are, and give them individual storylines along with the larger season-wide story. And just because it's animated doesn't mean it can't still be in the MCU. Of course it can, and you can have actors reprise them in live action later. The next thing we're changing is the plot. The animated series is not going to be set in the modern day at all. The series will start with them coming to Earth in the early days of humanity. Each episode will jump forward about a couple hundred years to show us various time periods throughout. One of the very few fun things about the movie is seeing what the Eternals were doing at different points throughout history, and the legends that they created. Imagine an episode that would show us what the actual story of Icarus was, as opposed to the one we all are familiar with. What did Athena do with the ancient Greeks in order to be immortalized as Athena? It would be really fun to have this time-spanning series and see the Eternals being eternal. Part of the problem with the movie is that these do not feel like immortal beings who have been around since the dawn of time. You just can't convince me that this is a person who doesn't know what Snapchat is. The other major change I'm making is that the Deviants are going to be an actual group of villains with personalities and characters within, rather than vague monsters. This way we'd actually see the ebb and flow between Deviants and Eternals and get to see more of the rivalry and differing viewpoints. The Deviants in the movie are really simplistic, they just want to eat people. You can even keep the twist reveal that the Deviants and the Eternals are cut from the same cloth and have them rebel against the Celestials, but how much cooler would that be with a whole season to build it up? This way, if the Eternals end up on different sides of the conflict, we would understand why. We could actually see Icarus and Cersei fall in love instead of being told. We could see the dark side of Icarus building and not just be told. The movie we got is like the most egregious example of telling and not showing that I have ever seen. There's a lot of other structural issues with the plot that would need to be ironed out, but this is just a general sense of why I think an animated series would have made way more sense at this point.
And it would have been wildly cheaper, so bonus for the penniless poor little shareholders.
Now, the only major character introduced that I didn't touch on is Kit Harington's Black Knight, and calling him a major character in any way is honestly a stretch. You don't see this guy for like 80 minutes of the movie. I don't get why we pal around with Kingo's little friend while Kit Harington is sitting on the sidelines, but whatever. Honestly, we'll just introduce him in Blade or something. I don't think he needs to be in this movie or project or whatever. But what I do think would be fun is to have an episode of our animated Eternal series set in medieval times so we could see the original Black Knight. Then, down the line, we could meet a modern version of the character. There's no such thing as a bad character. The Eternals aren't bad characters just for having a bad movie, but I don't think what we got did them any justice or made even a single MCU fan eager to see them again. Speaking of not being done justice, I didn't like a lot of Marvel's 2021 lineup. Most of it was mid or bad, but Hawkeye broke my fucking heart, dude. From the trailers, I really thought this was going to be my favorite Marvel series. I'm a huge fan of the Matt Fraction Hawkeye run. I love Kate Bishop, there were rumors of Kingpin returning.
What could possibly go wrong?
For starters, there's just too much shit going on. This show introduces Kate Bishop, the Tracksuit Mafia, Kingpin, Echo, Swordsman, the return of Yelena, and even Pizza Dog. All of this is a lot for a 6-episode miniseries. It ends up being frustrating, rushed, and unsatisfying for almost every single new thing that it tries to introduce.
The big change I'm making to Hawkeye is to make it based on the Fraction run, but for real this time. The show took the most surface-level approach to adapting the comic. They pretty much plagiarized David Aja's work for the marketing materials, but didn't actually delve into any of the interesting things that the comic does.
If you haven't read it, Clint Barton in the Fraction run is a total disaster man. A guy who just can't get it together. Now, I'm sure we all know, comic Clint is very, very different from movie Clint. It wouldn't make sense for this version of Clint Barton to be such a mess, unless we make him one.
I present to you that we make Clint Barton get divorced.
At least, he's separated from his wife. Following the death of Natasha and Clint's murderous rampage as Ronin, Laura Barton decides that Clint needs to figure himself out before he can be a reliable husband and father, especially with his continued habit of retiring and unretiring. Now single and chronically lonely, Clint Barton is renting an apartment in New York City. We get to see all his wacky neighbors whom Clint reluctantly helps on occasion. Everyone knows he's Hawkeye, and he's kind of a loser for it. In our version, Clint treats his identity as Hawkeye as a cheap thrill, neglecting getting a real job or being responsible in order to run around and shoot people with a bow and arrow. Enter Kate Bishop. We have the same plot here. She stole Clint's Ronin suit, and now he's under heat for returning to his murderous identity. After intercepting her, Clint would find himself with a new sidekick who he would reluctantly take on to help her with her big problem. Her new stepdaddy is the Swordsman, and he's involved with organized crime, the Tracksuit Mafia. I really liked the Christmas setting from the actual show, so I'd like for that to make its way into this version as well. I think it fits in line tonally with the tone of the actual comic. Also in this show, we're gonna dial up the comedy a bit. The Fraction run is very funny, and I think both Haley Steinfeld and Jeremy Renner have the chops to do so. Like I said, the main plot of the show is going to be taking down the Swordsman and the mystery man behind the Tracksuit Mafia, but along the way we're going to have little storylines involving some of the other characters we are introduced to. I want this version of Hawkeye to have a slice of life feeling. Not every episode furthers the plot. A lot of times, Hawkeye just ends up caught in a wacky situation. This is how we'd bring in Yelena and Echo, by making them one-episode situations rather than spending multiple episode arcs on them. Remember, our version of Yelena actually has a solid reason to hate Clint, so in this, she can just show up to cause a ruckus. This villain of the week structure would help us get to see a wide variety of characters, and provide us crucial time for our main characters to actually get to know each other. It's lame as hell that in the original show, these two don't fight side by side in costume until the very end. You might sense where I'm going with Clint's character arc here, that he has to learn to reopen himself to love and...
You got me.
Anything is better than what we got. Throughout the show, we would use Kate as a meter for how much Clint is healing from the loss of Natasha and his divorce. Another big change is to dive more into Clint's backstory. The fact that the existing show doesn't do anything with the fact that comic Clint was trained by the swordsman is lame. In our version, once he discovers the identity of the swordsman, we could get a whole flashback episode showing Clint's circus backstory and why he decided to leave it all behind. When you give the character a spin-off show, you kinda want to show us more of what makes them tick. And Hawkeye didn't do that. Lastly, we're not gonna have them fight Fisk. It'll be revealed that he's behind it all, but more of a tease than anything else for what's next up for the street-level heroes. His whole interaction in the show we got feels weird. If we keep him in the shadows, it'll raise excitement for future appearances, but won't make him look like a weenie. The sole focus should be on Clint and Kate. They are the heart and soul of both the real show and our fictitious one. Rather than a 6-episode event, ours would be a proper 10 to 12 episode show where we actually see the day-to-day of a character who we all know but aren't very intimate with.
And there you have it. Everything I would have done with Marvel's 2021 film and television slate. You may have noticed that I did not talk about a certain spider-related movie, and the reason for that is I know I'm going to have a lot to say, and this is already going to run long.
So I'm going to dedicate a whole episode of this Armchair Feige series to just the MCU Spider-Man movies. What I would have done with not just No Way Home, but with Homecoming and Far From Home as well. But what do you think of my version of Marvel's Phase 4? What would you change about the movies and shows? Let me know what you think in the comments. And remember, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We are all Kevin Feige.